Good afternoon, good evening, GitLab. My name is Christopher Leffoltz. I'm the VP of Development, and this is the Development Group Conversation. Today is July 1st, which officially turns into the second half of the calendar year, and I want to welcome everybody to this turn, hoping that everybody has more ups than downs in the second half of the year, given our turbulent times. We already have some questions in here based on the document and the video. Sid, you're up first.
Thank you. It's not really a question, but I read that you're thinking about a target of 14 merge requests compensated for group size for Q3. And it's just awesome and thrilling that we keep improving and we keep pushing to see how far we can improve. And I just want to say I salute that. I know how hard that is. I know how much the team's invested in doing that, and you especially, and really appreciate that.
Thanks. That means a lot, both to me personally as well as the team overall. Really appreciate the feedback. It's definitely been an interesting ride in regards to the fact of thinking in terms of this. And it's really funny, some of the conversations we had. Eric had a conversation last month where he was like, well, how are you going to get from 11 to 13? I said, well, I really don't know for sure, but every director that I have has signed up for going by 2. So that's a reason to go by 2. It feels like we're starting to get close to that edge. So that's where I just want to make sure. But one of the pieces of feedback I've really been pushing on, particularly with managers, is to start giving us that feedback of, hey, it really feels like we're getting to the edge of this, and let's make sure. The other thing I'm really trying to think deeply about is we had cases of folks being cooped up during COVID. So vacation is going to start kicking in here, particularly around the summer months. So that's other things that we're thinking about from that perspective. We need to, start factoring in those aspects. So, but really appreciate the feedback.
There's Patagonia with Let My People Go Surfing. There's Basecamp that works 4 days a week during those summers. I don't think we're going to do something like that, but I'm open to the idea because most of our people work in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm open to the idea of having a different target during the summer, just so that we don't feel like, oh yeah, we always have to explain, yeah, we're behind because it's the summer months. I think as a company, we encourage people to take vacation, and a summer vacation is the biggest vacation. We have most people in the Northern Hemisphere. Makes sense to me to set different targets.
Okay, that's something I'll take back to talk with the team about, and as we're settling in at the end of the month, we'll evaluate that. Just trying to also at the same time push for more iteration, because again, it's also about taking time, but it's also about thinking iteratively and how do we make sure that we're putting value into the product every day that we can.
Yeah, that's the counterintuitive balance. Like, we don't want you to work more hours, but we do want you to make more merge requests by splitting the work up in smaller parts. So that's a tough message, but I feel like we're doing a super good job of sending that. Thank you.
Cool. Natalia, you have the next one.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it seems frontend already met the goal for maintainer ratio, and what are further plans of increasing maintainer number there?
Yeah, I think the reason why we put the goal in of 4 to 1 is just because the back end is a little bit higher, and we didn't have necessarily the breakout when we originally were talking about this. There has been a debate about it. Could there be potentially a situation where we have too many maintainers, which I personally don't believe. If we have qualified people who can be maintainers, we should do that. The ratios, interestingly enough, the ratios of maintainers to developers is something that we're still measuring, but I've actually started looking at MRs per maintainer as kind of more of the metric. And really what I'm trying to think in terms of is like what's reasonable there. Since you're a maintainer, I'd love your feedback on that of what you think is a good number. The way we're pushing it is to keep the training program up. If you look at some of the other charts that we have on our code review page, what you'll see is we have a number of maintainers who are actively in training. We set up a separate issue to look at folks who are over 6 months and basically get feedback about, okay, what's going on? Why are we not converting to maintainers for these trainees? To basically push on that. And that's the reason why you've seen recently we've had 6 additional maintainers added, which is really encouraging sign from that perspective. Did I answer your question there? I gave you a lot of data in there, Natalia, but curious if I answered your question.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you have any feedback for as far as what you think the right ratio should be?
Well, I think that if we consider daily ratio for maintainer, because it's easier to measure for maintainer how many merge requests you have a day to review, I think 2 to 3 is a good goal. And we are close to this.
Okay, cool. All right. Yeah, I don't think we're quite there on the back end side, but definitely in the front end, we're getting close. So that sounds great from that perspective.
Just a small suggestion, but might be that we need different goals between front end and back end. At least I'm very open to that possibility that it's not the same.
Yeah, I think that's a fair call out. Some of that's the ratio of actually MRs associated similarly with DBs, depending on the review. So it may turn into that. That's again where I've been wrestling with whether we focus more on the MRs. Like Natalia has the example of MRs per day as an example. So that's if we definitely go to that direction, I think we do have to break it out based on skill set versus just having a generic one.
Thanks. Jim?
Hey, Christopher, I noticed on slide 5, you talk about monitoring an area, and I just kind of wonder what are your best practices for staying on top of an area or monitoring an area?
Yeah, good question. A lot of this is, you could argue is labor intensive and people focused, but it's something that's worked well for me, which is, really talking with the director who's responsible for a given area and making sure that's part of our weekly discussion, just making sure that that's an area of focus. Another one is that I'll keep up on issues in that area a lot more closely and kind of look at them associated with that, though I don't do that in all areas. Probably the best example of that is the integration exercise, where I've actually tried to stay back from that and just let things coalesce right now. Though I do have some thoughts down the road on that particular effort that I want to make sure kind of get addressed. And I'll be like, I started this morning conversation with Tim Zollman, where I kind of basically said, hey, we got to be thinking about 2 to 3 months from now, not just in the current term. So a lot of it's just direct management. Some of it's also direct engagement. As an example, another example of direct engagement, the growth team has started working using demos for the fulfillment exercise they have. And I had some very direct feedback on like what I was thinking about in terms of that, as far as expectations of what the demo should consist of, and trying to create a low stakes environment where we basically can see both successes and failures at the same time, so that we can figure out what are the things that are still left to be done, so that we have a better sense for it, and also thinking in terms of that end-to-end solution from that perspective. So I think it said 3 things in there, and I know it was rambling, and I apologize about that, but it was kind of, one-on-ones where I'm making sure that the person who's responsible for it is on top of it, inserting myself in a few spots, but also holding back in certain areas depending on where the stage of the project's at, and then making specific suggestions on activities associated with it are kind of the 3 things I think about.
Follow-up, is your book club open to other functional areas? If so, how does one join?
Yeah, it is open. Actually, Bartek Marnane is the one who's been running it out of APAC. So it's in the afternoons. It's at 4 o'clock Central Time today is the latest set of chapters. So anybody's welcome to join. I thought it got onto the group calendar, or it should be on the group calendar. So if you look at that, it should show the time for it associated with it. And anybody is welcome to join. Anybody can contribute, and anybody can join a book club. The nice thing about this is it's a book that you can read a chapter, and it's independent of the other chapters for the most part. So you don't have to necessarily jump in at the beginning and read it serially. You could pretty much jump in at a given point. Right now we're in the middle of the testing sections of the book, which we're reviewing today.
All right, thanks. Over to you, Sid.
Yeah, I wonder to increase the diversity in our top of funnel, can we make the internship program invite only, where we ask the recruiting team to actively reach out to people who we think will add to our diversity?
I think it's the same. I think that's reasonable. I think it's the same criteria that we're using for kind of our top of funnel for normal recruiting, though. The one thing I'll caveat, the other one is that we're probably a lot more, our evaluation is a lot more stringent, obviously, with full-time employees versus interns. So from that perspective, I think that's one aspect that we can definitely consider as part of this.
I don't completely understand the answer, but I'm happy that we're considering this. I'll put it on my agenda with Eric as well.
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me. Is the upshot. Like, we're already doing it, I think, for full-time employees. The one thing I'll say is that you could see the ratios be different, and the reason why the ratios be different is because full-time employees, we give a stronger stronger set of criteria for evaluation as they're coming in.
Yeah, I think, look, at GitLab, we don't just want to, we want to increase diversity in the industry as a whole. And an internship is a great learning opportunity, and it's a step towards that job. And if anything, I think those stepping stones are ambition for diversity there should be even higher than for a regular job. So if we're doing outbound only for our regular jobs, for sure we should do it for internships.
Cool. Mark, you got the next question?
Yeah, hey, Chris. I think that our contributor community is such a valued asset for GitLab. And I know that our teams do a lot of mentoring of our contributors around the world. And just wondering if there's any examples of them mentoring our folks and providing value in that way.
I can't think of any cases like that. The one thing I can say is that we have a lot of what we'll call community contributions from outside the development team proper, that's within the company, as an example. And in particular, one thing I have seen is that the documentation team has done a pretty good job of kind of explaining kind of what good documentation is versus let's say not as good documentation from that perspective. And I know of at least a few cases where developers have gotten better feedback on how to basically write better documentation that they've kind of taken to heart, and that's helped from that perspective. So, but I don't know of any case where it's been the wider community outside the company where we've gotten that type of feedback and we've leveraged it. I'd solicit any of the directors who maybe have an experience or senior managers if anybody has any feedback around that they know of. All right, nobody's thinking of one, so it's an area we'll have to ask Mark and see if we get any feedback, and I'll let you know if we have an example.
So one thing I did when talking to some contributors was that they often use how many upvotes an issue has to help decide which issues they want to work on. So not everybody, of course, does that, but I think that was an interesting takeaway.
Great, thanks, Wayne.
Cool. Kenny,
yeah,
the next one.
I have the next one. Hey, Christopher. I was sad to not see Easter eggs, but I'm happy to see more smiling Christopher. Yeah, I was reading through the deck and I saw this architecture process, and there's a dry process, which is awesome. It involves a lot of cross-functional team members. I'm just not aware of any PMs from my org participating. I don't know if it's because it's so new, or maybe I just need to get plugged in better.
Yeah, I think it's an example of we all need to get plugged in. This is an example where it was raised by I think it was Camille originally, or a team member. If it wasn't Camille, I apologize to the team member who actually raised it originally as a concern. We did have a process in place, but it wasn't being used. And Gregor's, Camille, and a few other key individuals, Jerry as well, I believe, all worked together to kind of come up with this. It's really brand new. It's something that I think we need to test out, and to be frank, we need to get it in our muscle memory, right? So like, I'd encourage even maybe small things from an architectural perspective be encouraged to kind of think about it in these terms, because I think it's something that we have to start using on a regular basis if we're going to really have these discussions and kind of make sure the right things are happening, both locally as well as across the whole organization from that perspective.
Cool. Yeah, and I should be clear. It's fine for me to be informed here, and I'm sure there was something I could have consumed. I was more saying if there's an active architectural change that has a PM dry, I'm not aware of it. It sounds like it's so new, there probably isn't one.
Yeah, the one Stan just wrote it in, which is the CI builds, which I'm forgetting. But that's part of the reason why I put it in here, is kind of multimodal feedback, right? Get the word out from that perspective, so folks are kind of aware.
Cool, thanks.
Cool. I am desperately trying not to ask for more questions because that's not our
Okay, just stop. Don't do that.
But I want to
Just leave the awkward pause there. There was a piece about architecture in there, and I wonder whether we can elaborate a bit. I don't know almost nothing about what we're trying to do. I know what I'm afraid of. And what I've seen in previous companies is that there were architects who weren't really in the details, but had these generic concepts. And I've seen that at GitLab too. For example, we had a piece of functionality that a customer really wanted ready, but it was made with a RESTful API. And because we're GraphQL first, that functionality didn't ship and it had to be rebuilt for next release. I think that is ridiculous. And that's the kind of things I'm really afraid of taking a hold in the company.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that we have to work to basically make sure that we combat. In fact, that's probably one thing that we probably need to do as a second iteration on that actual effort, is to make sure that we're combating that kind of mindset. I think this is more about the fact that sometimes people are coming up with things and they're not sure how best to make sure it's getting addressed architecturally, or even how to make sure that they're comfortable with the changes associated with it. So like, understand we don't want to prevent people from doing stuff. We definitely don't want that. But at the same time, like, some things are becoming cases where we need to have better consistency. You know, as an example, one of the potential Q3 OKRs is around pajamas and getting better componentization of some of our front end work, as an example, right? And that's super critical. Like, especially like if you said to me tomorrow, Christopher, I really want to build another product, but I want it to look like GitLab and to act like GitLab, and what's the basis that you can basically leverage stuff? That's an opportunity for us to basically have that capacity to do that in the future, right? So those are things that, at least this is the kind of the sense of it. But to your point, we have to have, whenever we've done this, where we've said organizationally, we've had this problem that we know is going to happen. So we have this to combat it. Stable counterparts is the best example of that. I think we need that counter to that. That's great feedback from that perspective.
Thanks.
And if you don't mind, I'll chime in. I just parsed through that MR that Stan provided. I don't think this is architectural principles that we need to adhere to. This is architectural solutions to known problems that might not just surface on a single issue. That's the example that I'm reading, is not what I think you're rightfully pointing out as a scary path to walk down, Sid. So.
Yeah, we don't. I've seen too many ivory towers, and I hate to say it in a violent terminology, but I'm very much against ivory towers of any sort from that perspective.
Yeah, so maybe consider adding that, like, no architecture astronauts allowed. Pragmatism. It's all about results, and it's about shipping.
Roman, you had a comment that you were writing in. You want to verbalize?
Sure. Just one thing or so. I feel like when we kind of trust engineers who like to make a lot of the architectural decisions or so, I sometimes fear so that they just overlook things, because, like, if you're in the trenches working on the things and you have your direct path in front of you and there's like certain touch points you have, and somebody whose role is basically like guiding some of these kind of things has probably a very different perspective from a higher level, kind of higher plane on the whole thing, and can sometimes see things that have like a decent overlap that you as an engineer would maybe not see, because it's like not in your direct path. So I feel like having some kind of this, like a more, I would say, strategic architecture or so, that helps to kind of plan the right things or look at the right things in the right way, can sometimes help. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's what we're attempting here. The aspect that we just don't want is that that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Particularly with holding back other activities that desperately need to be done as an organization. So I think it's the balance we're looking for from our perspective.
Sure.
Yeah, and I just wanted to call out that this is something that come up multiple times where people are trying to implement solutions as a DRI and they're just looking for support on how to like solve it in a way that is in line with our values and in line with our technical considerations they need to take. It's more of a guidance role than it is like a gatekeeper role, I think, in the way it's been described for the most part. So I think that's in line with what you were asking, Sid. And certainly think when these have sort of organically come up in the past, people have just been looking for that type of support.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. Like a way for people to reach out, and calling it something like architecture support, kind of, that already tells you it's not architecture blueprints, it's architecture support, and keeping a strong ownership at the DRI. You don't have to listen, you don't have to reach out. There's no gatekeeper. I think those are great principles. Thanks, but I agree, Daniel.
Can I chime in here, Christopher, real quick?
Absolutely. You always can chime in, Darva.
Thank you. So we actually did this morning. The knowledge team, we're working on Confluence integration, and there are other teams out there doing the same. And so we scheduled a meeting with the ecosystem team regarding how to use Atlassian Connect apps. In the exact same vein, we had them look at our epics, our issues. We brought in security and quality so that we could all get on the same page and share lessons learned. And it really, I think, will eventually turn out to reduce our learning curve because we sat down and had a conversation, and it just took 30 minutes.
Thanks for sharing that. That's a good first result from that perspective. Really appreciate you sharing, Darva. Cool. We've hit the end of the list and no awkward pauses. We're at 22 minutes past the hour, so great group conversation. Thanks everybody for the questions and feedback, and everybody have a great GitLab day and a great second half to the calendar year.